When you think of an anime that fails, what comes to mind? I'm sure a lot of you are rubbing your hands together, salivating over some of the hottest garbage imaginable, but odds are you're probably forgetting one key thing. Stick to the end to find out just how horrible an anime can be. Now then, let's get into it. Sometimes people forget you really need to know what a good series is to know what a bad one is too. Without anything to compare it to, you're just left with whatever you chose first. Now, as you can tell by all the different shows in the background, I'm not giving you just one great show as an example. You know there's a lot of great ones out there, and what makes them great is that they execute everything a viewer asks for in whatever type of show it is. Let's say it's action. Then you want good arcs, great animation, and characters you can root for in a fun but also serious plot. What about all the romance shows? Well, that one has a few more rules to it. I won't get into all of them in this video, but you do need two competent characters. Oh wait, you don't? But you gotta have actual romantic feelings, don't you? No? The point is, you'll find some variations of what's needed in a good anime. Broken down super simply, it's a show, a story. A story needs good characters, a good rising action, whether it's broken into arcs or cores or seasons or anything. All that matters is that you enjoy it to the end. If that was tier 4, then this is tier 3. Shows that did decently in the eyes of most, but failed to impress in one or two categories, leaving people divided. Some of these include Akame ga Kill, Another, Wonder Egg Priority, and Kiznaiver. Now, to the credit of these shows, they have a very big following. Akame ga Kill is a fun thriller, but what has it ending up on this list? Its ending. What about Another or Wonder Egg Priority? All their issues stem at the end. Now, that's interesting because you start off commanding a big audience, but once they see the ending, people get scared. Maybe their once strong thoughts on the show end up wavering. From what I see, a climax or an ending should not be confusing in any way, rushed or let down. It can't be forced or altered for plot convenience. These are some of the ways you can lose an audience from just an ending alone. Now, I do want to point out that I didn't say Kiesniver, and for good reason. Its problems had nothing to do with its ending. What it does is fall for the greatest trick in setup, and that's writing with your mind and your heart. And I'll explain that. It's when you have a show half planned out and the second half gets into fanfic material. You want to broaden the scope, broaden the horizon, but if you either think too big, stretch yourself out too thin, or never had a strong base to stand on in the first place, you're gonna end up like the iconic Darling in the Franxx, which did just that. Kiesniver actually did something similar, but why I'd put Kiesniver in tier 3 and Darling in the Franxx at tier 2 is because in the end, Kiesniver could satisfy at least some of its audience regardless of its issues, but Darling in the Franxx just couldn't. That brings me to tier 2, surface level issues and very wrong turns. Most of these shows come across as either fun bad or confusing. Sometimes the audience just isn't on the same page as the writers, and while that seems like I'm downplaying it just a little bit, that can end up being a serious issue for those shows down the road. Some examples of tier 2 shows would be High School of the Dead, Brynhildr in the Darkness, and Elven Laid. Now, the threshold isn't gore and blood, but it does highlight what could be a struggle to appropriately add those things into a series. Some shows genuinely lean on one form of content that may not be strong enough to hold the series up. Other times, it can be two forms of content to hold up the series, but each aspect contradicts the other. Tier 2 issues can normally be fixed with better writing. Now, with the one change alone, I don't think it'll magically end up as a high tier show like Bleach or Chainsaw Man, but as long as it goes in that direction, it's always a positive. Tier 1 shows. This time it isn't tier 1 shows, but tier 1 mistakes. These mistakes can cost a show its life, flat out. Now, what am I talking about, and does this just happen in the most god-awful shows? The answer is no. Let me give you an example. Re:Zero, a franchise that's done pretty well for itself given it was moments away from the greatest crash and burn in all of anime. I am, of course, talking about the end of season 1. To break it down, and yes, there's spoilers, at the show's start, Subaru, not that Subaru, and not that one either, I'm talking about Subaru Natsuki. He begins acting like an upstanding protagonist with newfound power, skills, and abilities in another world. That's pretty typical, but when he keeps on looking into that crystal ball, he finds no good routes to a happy ending. That leads him to go on a tirade, speedrunning, becoming a terrible main character by ruining his image, his connections, and finally his sanity. Possibly without recognizing the true effects his words and actions have on others, he desperately attempts to manipulate and nosedive right into a grim future. A show threatening this level of main character ineptitude is practically show suicide. He even asserts his ineptitude, stating that his glowing character was all a sham. At that point, you're left with no main character and a bunch of side characters who want nothing to do with him, left to their own devices and living out their own separate lives. This show's very lucky that it just barely veered off that course, with the main character willing to accept his mistakes and starting anew right back from zero. That's just one example of what to never do nor risk, because your audience is most likely younger than you, the writer. And to tell someone younger than you it'll all be okay if you just keep watching, there's no promise they'll agree to those unspoken terms. Another absolute failure is probably the best known worst series you could ever think of: School Days. As a hentai, it's terrible. As a regular series, it's terrible. Though I bet statistically one of you watching found this to be a genuinely good show. There's a few golden rules to a show that are completely unspoken but very important. One is to never end up killing your main character or characters, especially in a brutal way. If you do that, you'll be left with no cast, no audience, and no morals, cause who the hell kills the people that make their show what it is? While I could probably deep dive into the series for a bunch of reasons, I'll just tell you this show broke more than one golden rule, which lands it on the naughty list for life. If you have a show you think has hell to pay for being as bad as it was, comment down below, and as always, I'll see you next time.